Hello, Miles to Go, Chapter 48. Nothing clears the mind, nor colon, like an encounter with a grizzly bear. Alan Christopherson's diary. Prior to entering the park, I spent the night at the Brandon Iron Inn, which had a large replica of a bear trap over the front doors. The next morning, I ate an Egg McMuffin for breakfast, then walked into Yellowstone Park. Pedestrians, as well as cars, are required to pay an entrance fee, and I paid $12, which was valid for 7 days. Less than 100 yards past the gate, a large sign informed me that I was now in Wyoming. Just a few miles in, I passed two trumpeter swans in a pond surrounded by trees growing at a 30-degree angle. I was happy to be back in nature and feel her healing. That night, I pitched my tent in a place called Whiskey Flats. The next morning's walk led me past the Midway Geyser Basin and Biscuit Basin, where I watched the steaming geyser water run down fluted sandstone gullies to cool in the river. An hour later, a sign told me Old Faithful was just 1 mile ahead. After a mile, I turned off the road to Old Faithful, which I missed erupting by a few minutes when I stopped to use the bathroom. I wondered if I should wait for the next eruption, but instead I returned to the main road and headed southwest to West Thumb Junction. I'd walked about 4 hours when I reached the Continental Divide, elevation 8,262. What I knew of the Continental Divide was this: water that falls on the west side of the divide drains to the Pacific Ocean. Water that falls on the east side drains to the Atlantic Ocean. What I didn't realize was that the divide wasn't some large straight rift, rather that it moved all over the place, and I ran into 2 more Continental Divide signs as I walked. That night I camped illegally, hidden in the dense forest just 50 yards from the road. My third day in Yellowstone, I reached West Thumb, which received its name from its thumb-like projection of Yellowstone Lake, and began my trek around the lake's western perimeter. The scenery was beautiful and the air was crisp and sweet, similar to my walk through Washington over Highway 2. The day proceeded without incident until I had an experience that every car-driving tourist in Yellowstone hoped for, and anyone in the wild prays not to have. I encountered a grizzly. I had stopped to eat my lunch when the bear walked into a clearing about 30 yards in front of me. I slowly reached into my pack for my gun, praying that I wouldn't have to use it, as the advantage definitely belonged to the bear. I had once seen a PBS documentary on a bear mauling incident, and I came away with information that, at that moment, was rather unsettling. The bear's metabolism is so slow that it can still run 200 to 300 yards after a direct shot through the heart. With a small caliber handgun, the chances of a direct hit on a moving bear's vital organs, especially with my untrained hand, was infinitesimally small. And with a round as small as a 9mm bullet, it might only serve to make the animal angrier. I'm not certain whether or not the bear saw me, though I assumed it had at least smelled my presence. It lingered in my area for a tense few minutes, clawed at a tree, and then lumbered off. I don't think I breathed until then. I waited 10 minutes to make sure it was gone, then I walked back to the road and continued my trek. That afternoon, I walked past acres of forest that had been burned, leaving black, ashen remains on trees and the heavy scent of sulfur in the air. It wasn't until after dark that I reached greenery again. I knew from road signs that I was finally near the park's east entrance, but I was exhausted, so I hiked into the forest and made camp. The bear was still on my mind, and I spent an uneasy night waking at every snap of twig or coyote howl. As it turned out, I had camped less than a mile from the east entrance gate. I crossed the Yellowstone River on Fishing Bridge, which appropriately was lined with fishermen, then stopped at the Yellowstone General Store. Even though I had officially left the park, I wouldn't have known it if it weren't for the signage, as the road led into Shoshone National Park. At lunchtime, I sat down with a sandwich and looked over my map. By adding a couple extra miles to my daily routine, I could reach my next destination in 3 days: Cody, Wyoming.